So I've been coming to St. Patrick's now since maybe just before the Advent season, 2 years ago, maybe at this point. I'm not sure. Anyway, I've noticed as part of the Episcopal worship, with which I was not familiar before I came, that we use our bodies in worship. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when I was a child growing up in the church, I was taught that there were three basic positions. And you might have heard this, I'm not sure. But there's the standing, the kneeling, and the sitting. The standing always represents a posture of praise. So you always stand when you're giving praise. The kneeling represents a position of prayer and humility, and we're always seated for instruction. So typically you would be seated during the sermon or during the readings in the church. You stand. Nowadays, it just depends on what parish you're in, but you'll go into one parish and you would stand throughout the entire Eucharistic prayer. We stand for part of it and kneel for part of it. Anyway, so those were real elementary kind of just basic thoughts on it. But as I've spent more and more of my life within the church, one of the things that has frustrated me to some degree is how limited we use, and what a limited way we've used our bodies to worship. So, and part of that was the character of the church that I grew up in was what we would call kind of a broad church. And we didn't use incense and Sanctus bells or things like that. So I remember when I first went to seminary, the first evening we had what's called a solemn evensong service, and part of it was the chapel was so beautiful at General. It was kind of neo-Gothic or Victorian Gothic, dark and moody. I had never, ever been in a church that used incense. And here it was, these billowing clouds of smoke with this profoundly sensuous smell. I'm not allergic to incense, so I love it. Was filling this chapel. And it was just marvelous to see this, number one, this great procession, but also to have different senses than I was used to engaged in worship. It was profound. So when we think about how many of our senses are engaged in a typical service, it's usually our hearing and our seeing, a bit of touch in that there's a moment in our liturgy where we exchange the peace with each other, and that can be anything from just bowing or shaking somebody's hand, or actually kind of that European style embrace where you cheek to cheek. And then with the Eucharist there is taste, but rarely do we engage with smell. And our sight in many churches is limited to just what we see, but I think we can develop that so much in a way much richer, like when I go to the chapel experience at General. The thing I loved about that incense was there were tall, high ceilings, and the chapel itself was not uniformly lit. There were areas of darkness in the chapel, and then there were bright areas. So the smoke was rising, and you would see slivers of light with the smoke coming through. And of course, there were stained glass windows. Some churches don't have them. Anyway, so how can we use our body? The thing little habits we have. For example, if a crucifer is going past you in the congregation, the typical person would be standing, because that's usually your procession. And the typical response would be either to nod your head at the cross or to do a bit more of a bow. So that's a first. The second thing is you will have gestures that will involve your body. So when the gospel is announced, the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to so-and-so, if you're a newcomer, you won't know what some of us are doing, but there are 3 places that we make the sign of the cross as we're saying or hearing those words, and it's Christ be in my mind, Christ be on my lips, and Christ be in my heart. So that action would take place when you hear those words, the holy gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to whichever one. And then as clergy, I get to make all kinds of gestures that members of the church don't typically do. So I'm standing and about to offer the Eucharistic prayer, and there's this incredible, it's almost equivalent to liturgical sign language. So you're standing, and the first thing you do is you're saying glory to God in the highest, and there's this moment in which it's as if you're gathering the whole of creation and lifting your hands as high as you can, and they come together. And then there's just the typical, as you're celebrating, and called the orans position, and again it's lifting words up and the prayers up in a place of thanksgiving. There comes a time when you can bow and cross yourself. There's in one of the older or Rite One, and in the older prayer books, where we would say, and now we offer unto thee ourselves, our souls, and our bodies. And basically at that point you lean over in an act of offering. Some people genuflect. And usually they would genuflect at, there's several occasions where you would. One would be as you're leaving your pew or your chair to come forward and take communion. And of course we kneel. The Episcopal Church has been lovingly teased as having calisthenics because of the way we use our body in worship. Again, forgive me for rattling on about this, but when I was in seminary, my liturgy professor would talk about the ways in which people would respond to things like the cross going by. And he said some people are so uncomfortable, they don't nod their head, they don't bow, they just simply flare their nostrils. It was kind of a humorous way. Some people bow their heads. Some people will do a profound bow as the cross goes by. Many people have also learned to use the sign of the cross at the mention of the Trinity. There are other places we can use that. I won't go into all those details, but again, that's some body movement. But so I wanted to ask you, you come out of such a rich tradition yourself, and you have studied from a spiritual and soulful place all the actions of yoga, etc. Where are you most challenged by the reservedness of a church, and where would you love to see some other practices introduced?
That's a great question. I am challenged by reservedness of all kinds, regardless of whether it's happening in a church or elsewhere, to a certain extent. I do want to say, though, that the ritual that you discussed here is very much part of the appeal that the Episcopal worship style has for me. And I do think that there's an aspect of reservedness that brings reverence and a kind of mystical stillness, and that I am very comfortable with. And don't, I think I often find that that's broken down maybe too much. Ecstasy is something else. That's still very much the body's being moved by the Spirit. But movement for just movement's sake, and let's just be loose because we can't handle being serious. I have an equal problem with that.
Oh, I do too.
I have an equal problem with that. And so for me, what I have learned from the practice of yoga, through the practice of yoga, is that it can go inside out, right? So in the same way that doing the gesture, after many years of doing the gesture, inspires the word and the feeling, right? Just making the position brings to the mind and the heart everything that goes along with that. When we smell a familiar smell, if we were using incense, smell and memory and all of that go together. And it can happen that the gesture came first, right? Or that the gesture came last. The feeling came first, and the feeling inspired the gesture. Mm-hmm. If you've ever experienced real knee-slapping laughter, right? Or real laughing so hard you pee your pants, or, you're surprised and so you, you clutch. There are natural gestures that the body makes in response to emotion, spirit, what you're feeling. And asana is like that too. So in the yogic practices, many of the postures that have come into common use and that are taught in classes are believed to have occurred spontaneously in meditative states. And so it's like you can get to them either way. You can slap your knee and that makes you feel ha ha ha, right? Or you can feel the ha ha and slap your knee, right? It can go either way. And so for me, all the gestures that are traditional, but that just bubble up, right? I do like to feel like there's a freedom for something to bubble up if it is genuinely spirit-led.
That's a good point. I think about having not grown up in a church that I was taught how to make the sign of the cross, but learning and embracing those practices and how they got incorporated into my soul. Mm-hmm. For example, if I'm going to go into a meeting that I know is going to be difficult or possibly contentious beforehand, I will get really quiet. Mm-hmm. And I will just simply make the sign of the cross on my lips, not for anybody to see or anything, but it's become a part of my own prayer life. And it's a reminder, please let what comes out of your mouth come from a place of grace and a place that is grounded, as opposed to, I'm going to react, I still do that, but I love how it's gotten integrated. Mm-hmm. There was a period of time where I had there's a stone, it's called a starlight, that is found in this region and part of North Georgia and East Tennessee that always makes some shape of a cross. Sometimes it's they're beautiful. Mm-hmm. And I used to carry one in my pocket so that I never wanted to draw attention to myself, but I could always trace it with my thumb while I was talking, and it was a profound thing. And I can think, you were talking about the deep place and not knowing what came before or after. Singing is that way.
Yes.
And that's another way in which we use our bodies and our voices in singing. But if you are singing, for example, a hymn that is so well known, and you don't need the music, you might need the words, but maybe not, you can sing from a place of total prayer, and I think it gives a lot more freedom to be relaxed, to maybe take a deeper breath, sing louder than you normally would. Whereas if you're tied to the music and a piece of paper and you're afraid of, oh, I don't know this well, am I going to sing the wrong note in the wrong place? We clamp up. So I think all of our liturgy and our ritual, the more familiar we are, the deeper and deeper we can express our sense of prayer.
Yes.
There was one thing I wanted to bring up, and it's just for an academic, but also from an art historical background. Fra Angelico, the great painter, did so many frescoes at San Marco in Venice, and he illustrated in the cells of the novice monks that were associated with this parish church and monastery. He illustrated using, I believe, from St. Dominic, a series of positions of prayer in these, every one of their rooms had a fresco. And it was a way of teaching the novices as they were entering into a monastic life before they made their final vows, the ways in which our bodies respond and the appropriateness of it. So I think there were 8 or 9 forms of prayer, many of which are still practiced today, and some of which are probably alien to us, but they're beautiful, and they all demonstrate positions, the way we use our body in supplication and desire and thanksgiving.
Yeah. Well, the yoga practices, in my experience with them, it is that there just are natural positions that make you feel differently, and in the sacred feet yoga practice, it is more of a moving prayer. And so the teachings are set to certain body positions, but they just flow, There's be as kind to yourself as you are compassionate to others, right? And you're looking in on the part that's about kindness to yourself. You're looking out on the part that's compassion to others, and just those sorts of. And it can be a tool of memorization as well. If you have a movement linked to the teaching, then both are going into you. You're embodying.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
The teaching. And I mean, we are, as followers of Christ, we're about the incarnation. And so to be too reserved about the body feels like an insult to me, to our created selves. For me, the thing that keeps coming up, and I have a similar experience in my own, as teaching in my own venues, right, is that there seems to come up for you, as it does for me, an awareness that these things do make people feel awkward, and an unwillingness to just let them feel awkward in order for the people who will get a lot out of it to have it. And like, if we aren't willing to sit through other people feeling awkward, you can't get to the place where they feel more comfortable, right? We have to be willing to be like, yep, this is going to be awkward. And like, we won't make you take your shoes off, right? If that's really like I cannot do it.
It's like washing your feet. Some people, just will never let them be washed.
But we can leave that alone. You know, we don't have to draw even attention to the fact that it makes some people feel awkward, and just let them feel awkward, but present it as like, this is normal. Like, this is normal. This is part of what it is to exercise our Christian faith. This profound mysticism is a part of our Christian faith. Incense, you know, maybe you say we're going to be using incense this day. If you are sensitive to incense, you might choose not to come to this particular service, or whatever the things, you know, whatever the take care of yourself things are. But if we continue to strip away everything that might make some people uncomfortable, then what is left? What is left? And the question of where does reservedness bother me, that's just true everywhere. Like that, what we talked about there, that applies absolutely everywhere. And I have done it myself in many teaching capacities, in an effort to, you know, want to be invitational. You can be, you know, what anything goes, but anything does not go.
Right.
Because you lose something. You know, you want to be as welcoming as you absolutely possibly can, and be willing to let people feel awkward and reassure them that, like, it's okay to feel awkward, but we're just gonna keep being ourselves even if it makes you feel awkward.
Are there aspects of our approach to worship and our use of body and ritual and liturgy that you would say closely mimics, or you see related to your own practices in yoga?
Yes, there are. We were discussing the different positions of prayer. Those are all positions that are common in a yoga practice. The uplifting of the hands, that's a very common opening preparation to feel like you're drawing spirit in and presenting yourself to receive spirit, light, to connect to source. There's also, if you are doing rituals to honor just the spirit universal, or to honor particular figures, particular images of deities, you would perform something called arati. And there's a tray, and you do the swinging of the tray, right? Mm-hmm. There are incense practices here too, but there's gestures with the tray.
Some people will take the host and make the sign of the cross.
Yeah,
I don't celebrate that way, but yes.
Right, but you're taking, and often this arati tray, you will have food on the tray also, where food that is offered to spirit or offered to the divine in any form is considered holy. And in a yogic tradition, that would often be distributed to the people who are gathered and considered particularly blessed because it was offered to the deities in those forms. There's also the practice of when you're taking your seat, either for meditation or as the seat of the teacher, there's a practice of bowing to your chair.
Nice.
In some form or another, or even going down on your knee. But there is a bow to the seat that you're about to take in order to honor either I'm going here to meditate, right? This is going to be my cushion where I'm communing with Spirit, with God, silence, or this is the chair I'm going to take, and I honor the fact that I am in the seat of the teacher, right now, and that I'm being transformed from just who I am personally, in my personality, into hopefully being, on my lips, it's that gesture of now this is not just Jenny talking, right?
Oh, this is getting me excited. That we just went off on a retreat that dealt with breath work. But one of the practices was to kind of settle yourself and become more open and clear, stuff out of the way, was a practice of taking 15 pretty quick circular breaths. And I've found that that's something I've been trying to do every morning when I wake up and every evening when I go to sleep. And I don't necessarily see us doing that in church, but it reminds me of offering ways in which we can let go of some of the things we bring in and be more present. So my friend Anna Hernandez, when she would come and visit a church, she always had like a rain stick. And before a church service would begin, typically, we're very bad at this at St. Patrick's, but typically a church would be silent. We aren't very silent. She would walk down the aisles of the church back and forth using the rain stick, and it would get everybody's attention. They'd be silent, and she would tell them why she was doing it. It was to shake off all things that we're bringing in that are distracting us. My car has a flat tire. What are we having for lunch? Have I picked up? Will the kids be home by then, or this or that? And she would just walk through the church going, and it was a profound experience. In the same way that I think the ringing of bells in a church service is actually to pull us out of our distractions, where we might have wandered off, and dong, and you have to look up. And that was the reason it was begun to be used. It was to call your attention, look up, get focused, be present. So now we ring a bell before church, but I love the idea of either the breath or the because it has a real power, that sound, probably more powerful than the bell is very focused, but the other is to let go, like shake it off.
And the dispelling. Yoga practices, there's, and depending on the traditions, and it's like, okay, well, it depends on what has happened in this room, right? Some of the body practices are about, okay, well, what has happened in this body? So you're clearing out your personal self. But even the space gets prepared physically, energetically, like with the incense. Right, but in a yoga practice, you also might see if something emotionally fraught or something has taken place in a space. You might put salt in the corners of the room. You might physically walk around and break it up to clear, to just send the intention of we're breaking, the shaking it off, we're breaking it up. Whatever was going on here before, that's no longer welcome here. It's like a mini exorcism of the space.
Or blessing, Move out.
Move out. Whatever is bad, move out, so that there's only space for Holy Spirit to come in.
So just in kind of wrapping this up, there are just a couple of thoughts that I've had. Where I might push, if I had the freedom to push us to worship in certain ways, I would love to invite us several times a year to take our shoes and socks off when we enter church. As goofy as that sounds, there's something so profound about having our feet actually touch the ground without anything between the sole of our foot and in our case the stone on the floor. There's a groundedness. I would love to see that. I would love to see us, we're such a sociable parish, but I'd love to see us learn how to embrace and welcome extended periods of silence. There's something profound that happens when several people can sit in silence with each other and not have to fill it. It might be awkward at first, but it really does provoke meditation. And I think the third thing is I would love for there to be, through our use of light in the church, being mindful that several of us don't see all that well, and we do need light, but I would love to create a greater sense of mystery of light and darkness, and perhaps that would be using candles more, might be addressing our lighting, I'm not sure, but when you walk into places that speak so deeply of mystery, it really does make every part of your body sit up and take notice and be far more alert. And open, if not slightly afraid, but open to what is around you.
Yeah.
So I welcome any suggestions.
Yeah.
But I think
I'm here for it. I would support that.